Hello and welcome to your Fantasy Premier League one-stop shop. I'm your host Stephen Gallagher, world number 3 in points totals over the past 3 seasons. Today I'm going to be spilling the beans on my FPL strategy and how to start your FPL season on the right foot. This is my first video, so drop a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Let's get started with how to create your Game Week 1 team, and the most important thing to consider here is team structure and the concept of price points. I've made this graphic to show the most important price points in every position that you should consider, in my opinion. As you can see, there are many important price points that you might want to cover, and the important thing is finding the right combination, because you're not going to be able to cover every one. And I think that's what makes this season in particular interesting, that Fantasy Premier League, the FPL towers have really got a good pricing structure this year that will make it very interesting because, like I said, you're not going to be able to get every player that you want, and you're not going to be able to cover every price point that you want. So there are 2 players which basically have their own price points, and that's Haaland at 15 mil and Salah at 12.5 mil. The idea here is that if you have Haaland, you can get to any other forward in the game. Same way with Salah, you can get to any other midfielder in the game, including these 10.5 to 9.5 million mids, which is the range of price points just below Salah, and that's Palmer, Saka, Son, De Bruyne and Foden. But if you start without Salah and one of these guys, you're not going to be able to get up to Salah without making 2 transfers. Same way with the midfielders, the price point just below that, which to me is 8.5 to 7.5 mil. You're not going to be able to get up from one of these guys to the 10.5 mils to Salah without making more than 1 transfer. That's where the idea of covering the highest prices is potentially something to consider here, and I am considering it myself, is the fact that if you just get the highest priced player in every position, which would be Trent at 7 for the defenders, and then Salah and Haaland. This allows you to cover every player in the game. Say you have Trent and then he starts the season very poorly, and then the Arsenal defense is really looking good. You can get down to them easily, 1 transfer. Same thing with Salah and Haaland. Like I said before, if they're not playing well or for whatever reason you think they're going to have a dip in form, you can go down to a player at a lower price point whenever you want with 1 transfer. So that's the idea of price points. Now moving on to, for me, the most interesting part of FPL, which is finding value. And this is basically how I create my Game Week 1 team every season. I start at the lower prices, which allows me to free up funds for my premium assets and find those differentials that will beat the template, because otherwise you're not going to win FPL if that's what you're trying to do. I mean, I'm trying to win it. I'm not sure about you guys, but you want to find those differentials, try to beat the template, and that's what makes FPL fun. And I think that's where the data analysis really comes into play, is finding those players with the underlying data, expected goals, expected assists, that is going to break the template and hopefully get you ahead of the curve. One thing to consider as well is that just because a player is priced low doesn't mean that they're bad. Obviously, FPL has priced a player low for whatever reason, usually a minutes issue and, a quality issue, obviously. But every season, there's going to be a player that they got wrong. A player that maybe in the season previously, they weren't getting a lot of minutes, but something happened over pre-season. Maybe a few players transferred out and this player has gotten their chance and they take that chance and they're low priced. Say Cole Palmer last season, he transferred to Chelsea from City and he absolutely exploded. He started the season off, I think 5.5 mil. Now he's 10.5 mil this season. So, I mean, it's easy to say, just find the Cole Palmer of this season. It's not easy. But you can try to find that player using data, and I don't think you should omit those price points from your team for that explicit reason that if you find one that proves to be insanely good value, then you're in for a winner. So the idea of starting at the lower price points means that I usually start my team by building the bench. And this is the bench structure that I've gone with essentially every season since I really started playing FPL, which is a 4 million goalkeeper that essentially will never play, as well as a 4 million defender that he may play, but probably not in the starting 11. I won't start him often. That may change this season with Barco, but we'll see if his minutes are secure. Either way, there'll be a 4 million player that if he doesn't play, I won't be upset. Then there's these 2 defender slots. That is the 4.5 million defender on the bench and 1 in the starting 11. And my idea is to rotate them. So I'll rotate these players based off their fixtures, and 1 will always be on the bench, 1 will be in the starting 11. Similarly with the first slot on the bench, which is either a midfield or a forward, 1 of them will start. They're both under 6 million. They could be both under 5.5. They could be both 5 million, depending on where the value is this season, and that's what you have to find. You could have a mixture of price points on this slot, But I think the important thing is that you do want to save money and not spend too much money on the bench, because if I end up having even a 6.5 million player, definitely a 7 million player on the bench, I think that's a wasted slot for me. I wouldn't want to be doing that. And that's just the way I play FPL. I know a lot of people maybe want to spread their funds more evenly, but for me, that's a suboptimal way of using your money, because you're not going to be able to have these players on the pitch, and that's where the points are going to be had. You're not going to get any points on the bench, so you want to spend the money in the starting 11. Obviously, with the security of having a good starting bench player. They don't need to be expensive, but they need to have good value. So using that bench, I can start my team structure, which, as you can see, it has that 4 million goalkeeper, it has the 4.5 million goalie, and then two 4.5 million defenders, a 4 million defender, and then I have two 5.5 million midfielders and a forward. Now, I won't go too into detail with the player selection I have here. I will do that in another video before the deadline, where I'll show you guys my draft. For now, these players are pretty much all locked into my team, barring any information from press conferences about, let's say, Hall. If he doesn't turn out to be a sure starter, he'll be gone from my team. Same with Jacob Murphy, and João Pedro. All these three are slight minutes risks. But for now, I like the look of them and their value, but I'll get more into detail with that in the next video. For now, let's say this is the starting team structure, and this is how I like to build my team. I'm not going to just put Salah in straight away, although there is one player that I did put in straight away in the 10 million price point, which I'll get to. But like I said, start off with the lower price point players on your team so that you know how much budget is remaining. So I look at this team and I think, what price points am I missing? And I'm definitely missing a premium defender. Now, whether that premium defender is Trent at 7 mil or a 6 mil, let's say Arsenal defender, that's up for you to decide. Let's say for now, I decide to go with Saliba. There I have another price point covered. And then I think, what other price points this season offer a good value? And I think a lot of us will agree that the 6.5 million midfielder slot looks very interesting. There's a lot of interesting players at good value this season, and I think they may have potentially really underpriced a few players. So I'm going to definitely want a slice of that pie. I want to have a player at that price point, and if I don't get it right, I can move to another player at that price point. So I've put in Kunku in there for now, who at the moment I think is very good value. If he plays, and if he can stay injury free, then he could potentially break the game at that price point. Then moving up to the forward slot, I know I'm going to want Isak in my team. I think everyone wants Isak in their team. He just looks incredible value at 8.5 million. Besides from an FPL perspective, I just think he's a brilliant footballer too. So I love to watch him. I love to have him in my team. He's on penalties, a Newcastle side that likes to score goals. He's in my team no matter what. So now I'm at a point where I have all these slots that I'm 100% certain I want to cover. Where do I go from here? I'm not going to be able to cover all the remaining price points, and in this structure that I've gone with, it's a 7 million defender, Salah and Haaland, and then a 10 million to 8 million midfielder and a 7.5 million mid. You're not going to be able to cover all of them. It's not possible. So you're going to have to find the best combination of these remaining price points that will get you the best value at the start of the season. So let's say we go with Haaland and Salah. And a lot of people want to do this, like I said, just to cover those premium price points. If one of them doesn't do well, you can move down to another player. And it's a good strategy to start off the season, honestly. I will say though, it's a safe strategy, and that's not usually how I play FPL. It's a mixture. I don't want to be completely safe, but I do want to take some, let's say, calculated risks. But for now, if you do want to go for Haaland plus Salah, extremely viable option and definitely the safe pick to start off the season, which is arguably the best way to start the season, is going with those sure things that you know they're going to return. Salah and Haaland. I mean, Salah's been doing it for 7 years in a row. Haaland for 2 years in a row. You know they're going to provide value, barring some crazy event. You know, Salah doesn't return against Ipswich, which I'm sure he will. But anyways, as you can see here, there's 3 remaining price points and you only have 19 million to cover them. Let's say you go for one of those 10 million midfielders. You're only going to have 4.5 on a defender and on a midfielder, and you definitely don't want to be spending 4.5 million on a midfielder, in my opinion, this season. Let's say instead you go for Haaland and a 10 million midfielder. I think a lot of people will do this. You won't be able to cover Salah, but you do have 21.5 million remaining in your bank to cover the other price points, which is good. You can get that 7.5 million midfielder in, which again, another really interesting price point this season, but you're going to have to sacrifice Salah, obviously. Another option is to go with Salah plus the 10 million midfielder, and that gives you 24 million to spend on 3 players, which is very interesting depending on how you want to structure your team. Another thing I haven't mentioned yet is what formation do you want to play? In my opinion, it has to be either a 3-4-3 or a 3-5-2. These for me are the only viable options. I would never play a 4 at the back. But as you can see, 24 million remaining for 3 positions. I mean, if you go for a bench forward at 4.5 mil, you're going to have, 19.5 mil to spend on 2 positions. You can definitely get some really interesting players. Another 10 million midfielder in there if you want. There's a lot of options there. So I don't want to go into too much detail about what structure you should go for, what positions you want to cover, or what players in those positions specifically. What I will say is that I'm going to be doing a video on my team, and a lot of the same concepts will be applied in my team, and I'll release that video before the deadline, obviously, for you guys to follow, and I'll do a few drafts that I'm considering. All of them are similarly structured, especially these players. I think all of these players, at least these price points, let's say, are locked. You know, I may go from a Jacob Murphy to a 5 million midfielder, in Nkunku to another 6.5 million midfielder, if there's any doubt surrounding these players. But for now, rest assured, these price points are locked into my team, and it's the combination of the other ones that is going to be the decision that I have to make, which I'll talk about in my next video. But for now, I'll just talk about some general strategy that I've always applied to my FPL team. General strategy that I believe it's the most important thing to always keep in mind whenever you're making a transfer, when you're making your draft, a wild card, whatever. Let's start off with the importance of expected minutes. And I think this really comes into play at those lower price points. For example, the 5 million midfielders, the 6.5 million mids, you're going to want to make sure that they play. The difference here is, say you have 2 players and they both have the same underlying data, expected goals, expected assists, but you know one of them is going to play more. These expected goals, expected assists are per 90 stats. But if your player is playing per 60, you know, you're not going to get that per 90 stat. You want them to play the full game, or at least most of it, which is hard to predict. That's why it's expected minutes and not assured minutes. You want to get as much info as you can, and that's where gathering info from press conferences really comes into play. It's a massive part of FPL, following the press conferences, seeing the manager quotes. Depending on the manager, you're going to have to take some of them with a pinch of salt, because I won't name any names, but a certain Newcastle manager likes to, I'm not going to say lie, but fabricate some information for whatever reason about his player's injury status. There's a lot of this going on, and it is important either way to keep in mind these press conferences, because you're going to get injury updates, you're going to get starting lineup leaks potentially. Another thing is these starting lineup leaks, there's a lot of people who have in the know information around Premier League teams that they'll leak some starting lineup information prior to the deadline. Usually for the first game on a Saturday, let's say there's a 12:30 fixture, you might get some info, you know, circling around the 10:30 mark that you can get in before the deadline hits. And that's why for me, information is always more important than price rises, because these players, there's going to be price changes depending on how many people are transferring in and out players. Their prices can rise and they can fall. I know a lot of managers like to catch these price rises, which is a fair thing. You want your team value to be as high as possible, and in some cases you could be losing out as much as, you know, 0.2 mil if you don't catch a transfer before the player drops in price and the player you want to get rises in price. That can be an issue, but for me, unless I know for sure that's going to happen, which is a very specific case, I'm willing to take that maybe 0.1 mil loss if I get more info on, you know, what if the player ends up not playing? They're not pictured on the team bus, something like this, something as simple as that. You know, I saved 0.1 mil, but now my player's not playing. So that's something I've always valued, info over price rises. Next thing, it seems obvious to say, but planning ahead, looking at player fixtures. You want to look at the fixtures ahead of time, especially if you're going to be using your chips. When it gets to later in the season and you need to plan your chip strategy, it will come down to fixtures. So I think it's a short point to make, but keep in mind player fixtures, and targeting those fixtures at the right time can be a really big advantage to get ahead of a swing that a player has when their fixtures start to swing. Another point is to minimize hits. I don't like taking hits. I think I maybe took 3 hits last season and I did pretty well, very well, let's say. And I don't like to take hits. It's -4 points that, unless there's a double game week coming and you know your player is going to make back those points by simply playing 290 minutes, I try to minimize hits. And a lot of that is related to the point above, planning ahead. If you plan ahead, you know, you will be able to minimize those hits. You can only plan ahead so much. Obviously, there will be injuries. There will be, you know, random benchings that you may not expect. But for the most part, try to minimize those hits and plan ahead so that you don't have to take those -4s, -8s, God forbid a -12. Now, on to the last point, which is to take calculated risks. Now, one way to play FPL is to just get the template team and just follow that. Follow your favorite content creator who maybe they follow a very template team. For me, it's not an appealing way to play the game, and you're not going to win by playing that structure. You will get a good rank, maybe not a great rank though, because you want to take these calculated risks where maybe you have a player who is a high price point, say Salah, and he has maybe a few decent fixtures coming up. But you feel, from what you've seen and the data that you've seen, you don't predict him to score. And it's one of those 50-50s. But you have a player, let's say a 10 million midfielder like Saka, who you think, okay, I really like the look of his data. He has some good fixtures coming up. Maybe it is time to swap from Salah to Saka and take advantage of that, potential swing before anyone else does. It's another important thing to understand. These risks, you're not just doing it for the sake of it. They need to be calculated. I'm not going to advise you to get rid of Salah for some guy who may not even play. They need to be calculated, obviously. And it's about, backing yourself, backing your understanding of the data, of the game, looking at the eye test, seeing how these players look. Sometimes there's other things to take into account. Body language, how the team is playing under a new manager, things like this. You need to be on the ball with FPL. And I think taking those calculated risks can really pay off. And if they don't, at least it was calculated. At least you didn't just try to, it wasn't just a swing. It may have been a miss, but at least you took the chance and you backed yourself and your decision making. That's all for today, folks. If you liked the video, it's my first ever, so drop a like and subscribe. I'll be posting my Game Week 1 draft before the deadline, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, guys, have a good one.